Have you ever trusted someone so completely that you didn't realize they were quietly studying your every move, not to love you deeper, but to figure out the best way to leave with everything? My name is Ethan. I'm 45. For the past 20 years, I've helped families plan their financial futures, draft legal protections, and avoid ruin when life takes an unexpected turn. I thought I'd seen every form of betrayal possible. Until the day I opened my phone and read the message from my wife. I've transferred your father's inheritance to my new account. I'm starting over with someone who understands me. She was supposed to be on a wellness retreat. Instead, she was halfway to Costa Rica with a man I'd never met, a so-called spiritual healer, using money my father worked his entire life to earn. What followed was not a shouting match or a legal battle full of chaos. What happened next was quiet, precise, calculated, and it started long before she knew I was watching. Stay with me. I'll show you exactly how I handled it and why she never saw it coming. If you've ever lost trust, love, or money, this story is for you. Like, comment, and subscribe if you're ready for the truth. My name is Ethan Walker. I'm 45 years old, live in Austin, Texas, and for the past 2 decades, I've worked as a legal consultant, specializing in asset protection and estate planning. That means I help people prepare for the worst divorces, lawsuits, inheritance disputes, so they don't lose what matters when the unexpected hits. Ironically, despite all the clients I've helped shield from betrayal, I never expected I'd have to use those same tools to protect myself from the person I once loved most. I met Sienna when I was 37 at a charity fundraiser hosted by a mutual friend. She was magnetic, articulate, thoughtful, the kind of woman who could disarm a room without raising her voice. I'd spent most of my 30s building my practice and assumed I was meant to be alone. But Sienna changed that. She said she wanted a stable life, admired my dedication, and was drawn to the idea of building a future with someone who thinks long-term. At the time, I didn't know how literally she meant it. We dated for about a year before getting married. Nothing flashy, just a quiet ceremony under the oaks near Lake Travis. At first, things were steady. We shared expenses, built a modest home, even started talking about adoption. She worked as a holistic therapist, guided meditation, nutritional balance, that sort of thing. I respected her world even if I didn't fully understand it. She respected mine, or so I thought. What I didn't realize then was that Sienna was always watching. Not the way a partner watches out for you, but the way a strategist studies a battlefield. Calm, patient, intentional. And when my father passed away last year, leaving me everything he'd saved over 40 years of hard work, it became clear that Sienna hadn't just been building a marriage, she'd been building an exit strategy. I just didn't know it yet. My father passed away from a sudden stroke on a rainy Tuesday morning last spring. He was 72. He'd been a mechanic his whole life, owned a small garage out in Bastrop, worked 6 days a week, rarely took vacations, and saved every dime like it was his last. He wasn't a rich man by most people's standards, but what he left me was more than money. It was a lifetime of discipline, hard choices, and a deep belief that what you build with your hands and protect with your mind, that's your legacy. When he died, I became the sole heir. The garage, the land it sat on, his retirement savings, a few investment accounts we'd set up together years ago. Altogether, it wasn't flashy, but it was solid, clean, protected. My father trusted me to preserve it, and I was ready to do that. I wasn't ready for how quickly everything else would begin to shift. Sienna was supportive at first, or at least she performed the part well. She held my hand at the funeral, spoke gently at the wake, even helped me clean out my dad's workshop, but something was off. It wasn't sadness, it was detachment. Her eyes stayed dry the whole time. She didn't ask me how I was coping. Instead, she kept bringing up energy. She said his death had created a toxic field in our home, that she could feel the ancestral weight lingering over us. I tried to dismiss it as her way of processing grief, but the language she used changed. She started talking about needing to break generational cycles, about wanting to heal through movement, through travel, through spiritual alignment. She brought up a woman she followed online, a tantric wealth coach, and said maybe we should both look into attending a retreat together. At first, I nodded. Grief makes people strange. But then she said something that made me pause. "Ethan, your father never accepted my energy. Maybe now you can." I didn't know how to respond. I'd never heard her speak with such certainty and distance. In the weeks that followed, she began meditating longer, staying out later, talking about letting go of material attachments. When I asked what that meant, she smiled and said, "Maybe we need to let go of the idea that money equals security." That's when the real questions began. About the garage, the land, the accounts. Casual at first, then persistent, always framed as curiosity. "We're married," she said one night. "Shouldn't we know everything about each other's resources?" That was the moment I realized something had changed, and maybe it had been changing for a long time. At first, I told myself it was just a phase that Sienna was looking for healing, not escape. After all, grief hits people differently. But as the weeks turned into months, the patterns deepened, and the spiritual language became a mask for something else entirely. She started spending more time online in Zoom calls with groups she called Divine Feminine Circles. They weren't just about meditation or breathwork anymore. These were echo chambers where financial independence meant secrecy and empowerment meant separation. I overheard phrases like sovereign wealth, energetic misalignment in marriage, and masculine suppression of abundance. The conversations weren't about growth, they were about exit strategies. One name kept coming up, Asher. At first, he was just a speaker on a virtual summit she watched. Then he was offering private mentorship. He called himself a soul integration architect, which frankly didn't mean anything. But to Sienna, he was brilliant, enlightened. "He sees things in me you've never tried to understand," she told me one night after I asked why she was suddenly withdrawn during dinner. She began suggesting we attend his upcoming retreat in Costa Rica, a week of spiritual detox, financial unblocking, and couples ascension. "It'll bring us closer," she said, but her eyes didn't match her tone. She was trying to see if I'd say yes. I didn't. When I declined, her pitch changed. She said she might go on her own. Then a few days later, she framed it differently, that maybe we should invest in something bigger. A wellness center, a co-created healing space with Asher and his team. You could help structure the contracts, she said sweetly. You'd own part of it too. That's when my stomach turned. I'd seen this pattern before, not in my personal life, but in the lives of clients I'd advised through nasty divorces and asset theft. A spouse suddenly inspired by freedom, asking for access, full transparency joint titles. Not out of trust, but out of preparation. What Sienna was doing wasn't spiritual. It was strategic. She began pushing for complete financial openness, not just our joint checking. She wanted to merge everything: my retirement accounts, the property deed, the business account tied to my side consulting. No more secrets, she whispered one morning, tracing her fingers along my arm. Let's remove all the energetic blocks between us. I played along, but I didn't give her access, not directly. I needed to know how far she'd go and how soon, because by now it was clear she wasn't healing. She was planning. And the man who was helping her find herself was also teaching her how to take what didn't belong to her. She wasn't asking for my partnership. She was asking for my permission to disappear and take everything with her. In the weeks that followed, I began moving differently. Quietly, carefully. I didn't confront Sienna. I didn't accuse her. I simply watched, listened, and remembered what my father used to say. Never let panic make decisions for you. If something doesn't feel right, assume it isn't, and prepare accordingly. He and I used to talk finances every Sunday. Even after his stroke made it hard for him to speak clearly, he'd scribble notes on yellow legal pads. One of the last things he ever wrote down was just 3 words: trust is earned. At the time, I thought he was talking about a client issue. Now I know better. Sienna became bolder. She started asking for passwords, not just to joint accounts, but to my brokerage, my real estate files, even the login to the cloud storage where I kept contracts and wills. I pretended to forget. Then I pretended to consider it. I bought time. Meanwhile, I began transferring anything tied to my father's estate into structures she'd never see coming, a private trust account, an LLC registered in a different state, and custodial documents filed through a firm I once referred high-net-worth clients to. The beauty of having built a career around legal defense and asset planning is that you understand how quickly things can be taken and how quietly they can be protected. So I designed a decoy, a checking account, linked to one of our joint credit cards holding exactly $11,200. Not too small to be ignored, not too big to seem suspicious. Just enough to bait someone who believed they'd won. I even renamed the account Inheritance Reserve. Shared. That was the moment she began to shift. Her tone changed. Her eyes softened. She cooked again, rubbed my shoulders while I worked, said things like, "I'm glad we're finally being honest with each other." The trap had been set. Meanwhile, she packed for her trip. The Costa Rica retreat with Asher was now called Soul Alignment for Couples and Quantum Entrepreneurs. She said it would help her step into abundance and that she needed the space to clear emotional blocks between us. I told her I supported her journey. When I dropped her at the airport, she kissed me deeply. Too deeply. Not like a woman excited to return, like someone saying goodbye forever. That night, I poured myself a glass of whiskey and waited. 3 days later, the text came in. "I've moved the inheritance into my new account. Asher and I are starting a new life, one rooted in truth. I hope you understand." I stared at the message. Then I opened the real account, the trust, the portfolio, the corporate structure. Every penny was untouched. She thought she'd taken everything, but all she'd touched was bait. The message came in just after 9 a.m. on a Wednesday. I was reviewing documents in my office, going through a client's estate settlement, when my phone lit up. "I've moved the inheritance into my new account. Asher and I are starting a new life, one rooted in truth. I hope you understand." Attached was a blurry screenshot. Our joint account now showed a balance of 0. Every cent of the $11,200 was gone. There it was. Not a mistake, not a misunderstanding. A clean cut. No apology, no attempt to justify it with love. Just the cold execution of a plan she'd been quietly constructing for months, maybe years. I stared at the screen for a long time, not angry, not shocked, just still. Then I replied simply, "May it bring you the peace you seek." I set the phone down, unlocked my drawer, and pulled out the folder that held all the real documents, the trust, the incorporation papers, the quarterly performance reports from the wealth manager. Everything my father had left, everything Sienna had no idea existed. The bait account was empty, yes, but the real account's untouched, fully protected, safe. It was a strange feeling watching someone try to rob you, only to discover they'd walk straight into the illusion you designed for them. I didn't feel triumphant. I felt something colder, cleaner, like I'd just dodged a bullet I saw coming from miles away. Sienna didn't text again that day. No explanation, no elaboration, just silence, which told me everything I needed to know. She believed she'd won. That night I slept, not perfectly but deeply enough to wake clear-headed. I began making notes, quiet procedural things, locking down what was left of our shared accounts, removing her as beneficiary on my life insurance, calling the firm that handled our property title. Every move I made in calm. Because here's the thing, no one tells you about betrayal. It doesn't happen all at once. It arrives in hints, small asks, lingering looks, requests, wrapped in affection. But when it finally shows its face, when it takes, instead of asks, the illusion breaks. And if you've been paying attention, you don't react. You respond. Sienna had taken the bait with all the confidence of someone who thought love meant access. That our history entitled her to my legacy. That leaving with another man while looting what she could was some kind of spiritual rebirth. But I'd spent 20 years reading the fine print of other people's mistakes. She never saw it coming because the one thing she never studied closely enough was me. 3 days after her disappearance and the silent theft she framed as liberation, Sienna called. I was in the middle of a meeting with a retired couple finalizing a transfer of assets to their grandchildren. My phone buzzed once, twice, then stopped. A few minutes later, it buzzed again, then again. I let it ring. By the 4th attempt, she left a voicemail. "Ethan, we need to talk. I know you're angry, but let's be adults about this." I wasn't angry. I was working, focused, clear. That evening, she called again, this time with a sharper tone. "I took the money because it was best for both of us. Let's stop pretending this marriage hasn't been dead for a long time." Still, I didn't respond. She was spiraling, expecting confrontation. But I didn't play that game. The next morning, I got a text. "Let's meet. I'll bring my lawyer. We can discuss dividing everything fairly." That was the moment I knew she was about to walk into a room she wasn't prepared for. We met 2 days later at a small office in Central Austin. Her attorney, a man named Harold Crane, was already seated. Sienna arrived right after, fresh-faced, confident, wearing a crisp white blouse and the kind of detached poise someone rehearses in front of a mirror. She sat down and smiled like nothing had happened. "Ethan," she said, "we just want this to be clean. Civil. No fighting." I nodded. Mr. Crane took over. "We'd like to propose a no-fault filing with equitable division of all assets. Your house, your retirement accounts, and of course, the inheritance." I said nothing, just reached into my briefcase and pulled out a folder. Inside transaction histories, dated trust documents, a notarized asset map, all tracking the estate into private entities Sienna had no legal claim to. Crane started flipping through the pages. His expression shifted page by page. Sienna leaned forward, confused. "What is this?" she asked. "You said the inheritance was ours. You put it in our account." "No," I said calmly. "I put part of my personal savings in a shared account. The inheritance was never touched. Not by you, not by me." Crane turned to her slowly. "He's telling the truth." "What does that mean?" she asked. "It means I said what you took wasn't the legacy. It was the decoy." Silence hung in the room, the kind that isn't loud, it's heavy, dense with realization. "You planned this," she whispered. "I protected myself," I corrected. "There's a difference." Her smile dropped, her posture stiffened. Crane looked down suddenly, unsure of how much further he could negotiate. This wasn't the meeting she expected. She came to divide a fortune she thought she'd stolen. But all she'd done was disqualify herself from the table. The silence in that office didn't last long, but it lasted long enough. Long enough for Sienna to realize that her leverage was gone, and long enough for me to deliver what she truly didn't see coming. "I assume," I said, keeping my voice measured, "your lawyer reviewed the prenup." Sienna blinked. "What prenup? We didn't sign one." Crane looked up sharply. "Excuse me." I reached into the folder again and placed a copy of a notarized document on the table. It was dated 8 years ago, signed the week before our wedding during the final stages of the house purchase. We'd told her it was routine documentation related to the mortgage, and legally it was included in the package. But what she hadn't realized, or hadn't cared to ask, was that inside that packet was a clause that protected any premarital or inherited assets from claims in the event of unauthorized transfer. I pointed to it. Section 4, Paragraph 2. Any attempt to relocate funds from personal or protected accounts without documented mutual consent results in a full forfeiture of marital property claims. Crane scanned the clause. "This appears to be valid," he muttered. Sienna's face paled. "No, I don't remember this. That can't be legal." "It is," I said. "It's notarized, witnessed, timed, filed." She stood up suddenly. "This is manipulation." I didn't know what I was signing. "Then maybe you should have read it," I said without raising my voice. Crane cleared his throat and looked at her cautiously. "Mrs. Walker, if you initiated the transfer knowingly, and if that transfer was from an account you believed contained inherited funds, this clause applies. It's enforceable." Her hands were trembling now. "But that money was ours." I saw the name. It said, "Inheritance Reserve, Shared." And that, I said, was the point. She looked at me with something new in her eyes. Not anger, not defiance, but fear. Real fear. For the first time in months, maybe years, she realized she wasn't the one in control. "I'll return the money," she whispered. "I made a mistake." I stood slowly, collected my folder. "Keep it," I said. "You've earned it." She opened her mouth to speak, but nothing came out. I walked out of that room without a single raised voice. No rage, no threats, just clarity and the knowledge that the last 8 months hadn't been about fighting for a marriage. They'd been about preparing for its collapse. She tried to play the spiritual partner, but what she became was a cautionary tale in my own textbook. I didn't hear from Sienna for a while after that meeting. No texts, no emails, not even the kind of angry voicemail I half expected. I figured she was regrouping, maybe trying to convince herself she still had options. But 2 weeks later, the silence broke. It was a call. I let it go to voicemail. "Ethan," her voice trembled. "Please, I need to talk to you. It's urgent." She called again that night, then again the next morning. On the third call, I picked up. Her voice was shaky, stripped of the confidence she'd wrapped herself in for so long. "Asher's gone," she said. "He left Costa Rica 3 days ago. Took everything." "What do you mean, everything?" "The money from our account, the donations from his followers, even the advance I wired from a loan against my mom's house. I gave him everything, Ethan. $37,000. He said it was for our wellness center for the land. But the retreat doesn't exist. None of it does. I didn't say anything. I don't know where he went. His phone's off, his site is down, his number's disconnected. Still, I waited. My mom is going to lose the house. I promised I'd pay her back before the second loan payment hits. Ethan, I know I don't deserve it, but could you help? Just enough to keep her afloat. Please. I leaned back in my chair and stared at the ceiling. Sienna, you didn't just make a mistake. You made a series of choices. You lied. You manipulated. You tried to steal from me, and now that it's fallen apart, you want help. I was confused. I thought, no, you were clear. You were so clear you had screenshots prepared. She was quiet for a beat. You're really going to let me lose everything you already did, I said. What you're losing now is just the fallout. She whispered something I couldn't quite make out. Maybe a sob, maybe a curse, and then the line went dead. That was the last time we spoke. I later heard from a mutual friend that Sienna moved back in with her mother in New Mexico. She closed her business, filed for bankruptcy. The so-called soul partner never resurfaced, probably in another city now running the same playbook on someone else. But this time he didn't just steal from a woman chasing meaning, he stole from a woman who had already tried to do the same thing. To me. After the dust settled, I did something I hadn't had the space or clarity to do. In months, I drove out to my dad's old garage. The place had been sold to a local mechanic, but the sign was still the same, Walker's Auto & Sons. I stood in the gravel lot for a long time, just listening to the wind push through the pecan trees. The air smelled like oil and sawdust and memory. I sat in my truck parked in the same spot I used to sit with him on slow Sunday afternoons and let the silence fill me. Not grief, not anger, just space, clean space. Then I drove home to a smaller house, one I'd bought in a quieter part of town, closer to the river with no echoes in the walls. Just my dog, my books, and the workshop I'd built with my own hands. Life didn't change overnight, but it did change. I started hosting small financial literacy workshops at the community center. Nothing big, just helping retirees, newly divorced folks, and young couples understand how to protect what matters before it's too late. I told some of them bits and pieces of my story, not to shame, not to scare, but to show what can happen when trust is weaponized. I met someone too. Her name is Maya. She teaches yoga and works with at-risk teens. Divorced like me. Gentle, sharp, grounded. We're taking things slow. No merged accounts, no romanticized idealism, just honesty. Real time. Real trust. One night, while we were sitting on the porch, she asked me what I'd learned from everything. I smiled and said, "Trust is earned, but protection is planned." She laughed, not the kind of laugh that deflects, but the kind that understands. And in that moment, I realized something simple but powerful. I hadn't just protected my inheritance. I'd protected my future. Stories like this aren't just cautionary tales, they're case studies. I've worked in asset protection for 2 decades, and the most common mistake I see isn't ignorance. It's emotional optimism. We think love will protect us, that intentions will stay pure. But the truth is, when money enters the equation, clarity must follow. Here's what I tell every client now, whether they're newlyweds, retired, or somewhere in between. Love without a plan is a liability. You don't need to be paranoid, you need to be prepared. Have clear conversations about finances. Separate inherited or premarital assets. Put protections in writing not out of fear, but out of respect for your future self. And most importantly, pay attention to changes in behavior wrapped in sweet language. Red flags don't always scream. Sometimes they whisper through smiles. If this story resonated with you, take a moment, not just to think, but to act. Review your protections. Have the hard conversations. Share this video with someone who might need the reminder. And if you've ever been through something similar, leave a comment below. I protected what mattered. Your story might help someone else do the same, and if this gave you clarity, quietly tap that subscribe button. The next story might just save you from the one you don't see coming.